Trigger warning, mentions of suicide attempts. Hey, hi, hello, how are you? I hope you're well. Today we're going to be discussing $1 Million Baby, the movie about a boxer that came out in 2004 starring Hilary Swank, Clint Eastwood, and Morgan Freeman. This is a little different than my regular mini reviews because we're mostly going to be focusing on more towards the end of the movie, so let's get into it. Spoilers, by the way. So if you don't know, $1 Million Baby is a movie about a woman, Maggie Fitzgerald, becoming an incredible boxer and then becoming paralyzed after a fight. She and her trainer, Frankie Dunn, traveled the world, winning fight after fight, where Maggie would knock out her opponents in the first round. Dunn gave her a nickname, Makushla, which we find out at the end means my darling. After a while, Maggie, who after becoming paralyzed can't breathe on her own, asks her manager to remove her breathing tube to kill her. At first he refuses, but after 2 suicide attempts where she bites her own tongue, he agrees and he removes her breathing tube. Now, when I was watching this movie, for whatever reason, I just assumed it's based on a true story, which it's not. This is a fictional story. There is a boxer who became injured, who inspired a short story, which maybe inspired this movie, but it's not based on a actual person. I think if this movie was based on a real story, I wouldn't necessarily have these criticisms. Like, one tiny nitpick is the fact that Maggie won every single boxing match in the first round, all except one where she becomes paralyzed. It's not that big of a deal, and I get it, her character was awesome, she was a boxing prodigy. It's a nitpick, I know, but I guess I expected a good old-fashioned struggle montage, you know? But no, she's a prodigy. Anyway, now onto the more serious criticism. The message that a disabled life isn't worth living. After Maggie becomes paralyzed, she asks her manager to do what her dad did to his dog who was in pain or sick, I can't remember. She essentially asks him to mercy kill her or to euthanize her. And at first, her manager says no. He had not given up on her, and he actually had suggested that maybe they get her a chair she can use and she could go back to school. He was with her every day and he never gave up hope, so of course he said no to killing her. Maggie's reasoning for why she wanted to die was because she had already traveled the world winning matches, and she had heard her name chanted, and to not let her live past the time when she stopped hearing those chants. Now, on one hand, I understand the transition from being an athlete to being disabled is really hard. I actually have experienced this on a much smaller scale, where I used to be an athlete and then chronic illness took over, and now I need a cane when I leave the house most of the time. So, obviously much smaller than being paralyzed, but you know. So I do understand that perspective. On the other hand, becoming disabled, even to the extent of full body paralysis, does not mean that your life is over or not worth living. Even if you had a great life before, you can still lead a great life disabled. Now, if this was a real story, I'd be a lot more understanding. People have negative emotions, people want to die, being disabled can be so hard. That's real. That being said, I'm not sure how I feel about this fictional movie presenting the idea that her life was not worth living after becoming disabled and then validating that by having him kill her. Does that make sense? There are so many disabled people who do great things, like Stephen Hawking is an obvious example. Johnny Erickson Tada, who was an amazing paralyzed artist and author. Frida Kahlo was in a wheelchair, you know? Disability doesn't have to mean that your life is over. Even though Maggie's life was amazing before, it could still be good after, you know? I mean, Johnny Erickson Tada used her mouth to hold a paintbrush, you know? I've probably said this on this channel before, but I dislike toxic positivity. I don't think it helps anything. I think it leads to people bottling up their real emotions. I'm also not a fan of inspiration porn, which, if you don't know, according to Urban Dictionary, inspiration porn is a portrayal of people with disabilities as one-dimensional things that only exist to warm the hearts and open the minds of able-bodied people. This movie is the opposite of those things, but I believe there could be a middle ground in there somewhere. I bring those up because I just want to make it clear that I'm not saying I think this movie should have been more positive or should have been more inspirational. No. Like, her wanting to die, again, real. So I'm not saying they shouldn't include stuff like that. I'm saying that I believe the message of this movie, even unintentionally, is that her life after becoming disabled wasn't worth living, which is wrong. And I understand wanting to die, I do, but to validate that, I don't know. I've actually been told by people that if they had what I have, they'd kill themselves. I think this is something that a lot of people with disabilities or chronic illnesses have heard. People just don't understand. And this movie, again, validates that message that being disabled means your life isn't worth living, whether they meant to or not. And it's a shame, because I really enjoyed this movie. Again, I loved Maggie's character. I really loved the soundtrack. Morgan Freeman narrated, so you know that was good. Anyway, if you've seen this movie, what did you think? How do you feel about the ending? Do you agree with me, or do you think the ending was fine on its own? I actually do recommend this movie despite the message, because it was really well done. Like, the acting was great, again, the music, the characters, I did enjoy it despite the ending. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I'll see y'all later.